Hopefully have enough space, yeah.
Hey, everybody. Welcome. This is the World of Classical Music course. And it is my great pleasure to interview today one of the greats of conducting. This is Michael Slon. And if you want to talk about the generations of music, you're having one generation speak to another generation, speaking to another generation. Michael Slon was one of my, probably my favorite professor at the University of Virginia, where I was studying music back in 2001. And it doesn't feel like so many years ago, it feels like yesterday. And there's still so much that I remember from Michael Slon's teachings. And so Michael has very, very kindly agreed to have me interview him. And he has so many wonderful things to tell you guys about conducting. And I thought, what a great way to start the conducting module by interviewing Michael here today. So I've got a few questions for you. Hi, Michael.
Hello.
Why don't you just, hey there, can you quickly just introduce yourself and just let us know, who you are and, what you do at the University of Virginia.
Sure, yeah. First of all, bonjour. C'est bon d'être avec vous aujourd'hui. Although I will mainly speak in English because it'll be far easier, at least on this end, to do that. It's a pleasure to be with you. And just to give you a little bit about my background, I'm from New York State, here in the United States. I grew up as a pianist and did some singing in choir and accompanied choirs. And in undergrad, I double majored in music and English, and then went on to grad school in conducting and did both choral and orchestral conducting in grad school. And then after a few interim positions, I've been here at the University of Virginia, where Bethany was actually one of my first students in my first couple years here. I've been here almost 20 years. As the official appointment is as the director of choral music, and so I conduct our large chorus, the University Singers. The Chamber Singers is a smaller group. I guest conduct our symphony, and then I also conduct in town like a community course, like a symphonic style course called the Oratory Society of Virginia. So, and then teach every so often, teach some classes. So that's just a tiny bit about the background.
Great, thanks. So I'll take back to my first question. Basically I've prepared all these questions and I've prepared a bunch of questions for you, Michael, and I've pitched them, thinking and focusing on my students in this particular classroom at Telecom Paris being the place where I teach. And I'm very, very fortunate to teach because it's a great, great school. And I think my students would agree. My first question is a little bit of a silly one. I'm sorry, but it's for those who have very little music experience. My first question is, who's that guy in front of the orchestra or choir waving his arms wildly, and what is his job in a nutshell? Really, be honest. What's his job?
Yeah, his or hers, I guess we should say, right?
Yeah, we should say his or her job.
Yeah. It's interesting, and I understand that some of you in the class may have some music background or actual background in conducting, which is fantastic. So I'll try to speak at a couple different levels, I suppose. It's interesting when you're a conductor. I've had this experience, the so-called cocktail party experience, right, where people say, "What do you do?" And you say, "I'm a conductor," and the first response is usually, "Oh, that's very interesting." And then they want to know exactly what Bethany is asking. What do you actually do, and are you necessary, et cetera, various questions like this. So here's one of the answers I've come up with over the years. You think about the director of a film or a play, right? Or you could say the coach of a team. Their responsibility is to kind of inspire and organize the group of people they're with to realize some high vision of the project in front of you and to achieve that. And so if you have a director of a film, if you didn't have the director, it would be rather chaotic. All the actors would run around. You wouldn't have a clear-cut decision about what the background, the set should look like, the cinematography, the various choices involved. Are we going to edit the script a little bit, et cetera, et cetera. And in a way, there's a correlation to what a conductor might be doing, in the sense that you have to take the piece of music in front of you, study it seriously and honestly, and then assemble a group that in terms of its values tries to realize that music at the highest level. And that kind of involves a general goal and a specific goal. The general goal is you have to just create an ensemble that has some level of talent, which involves recruiting, auditioning, and training them just in a basic musical sense. And then there's the specific goal of whatever piece you're learning and wanting to perform at that moment. And then your specific interpretive choices and so on. And one of the nice things about being a conductor, as opposed to the director of a film or a coach, is you actually get to play in the game with your musicians, right? A coach is usually on the sideline, the director is off camera. The conductor is actually directly participating and shaping everything that's going on once we get to the concert, and including in rehearsal, which is actually in many ways more important.
Okay, great. That's perfectly clear. And so, just out of curiosity, what that he's holding, the conductor we always see when we go to a concert or when we go to an opera, when we go to a choir performance, we see him holding the stick. What's the stick for? What's the stick for? I think we call it in French. They say baguette.
A baguette.
They call it a baguette. Go
Wonderful.
figure.
I'm getting hungry.
Yeah. I mean, go figure, right? In French, they call it a baguette.
Yeah.
It's a lot less interesting, I think, in English, but.
You just say baton.
Yeah, baton.
Yeah.
What's the baton for?
Well, so there are a couple ways you can lead an ensemble, and I think I might have one here. Hang on. So this is kind of a baton, a standard baton. When I teach conducting here at the university, I try to teach my students to be able to do both ways, meaning to use just their hands to conduct with, which can be very expressive and effective, but also then to be able to use a baton and to have a clear technique with a stick. And sometimes we just call it a stick. And what it helps do is, I think in a way, you're able to project a beat more clearly across greater distance, sometimes with a stick, because it extends your arm by usually about 14 inches or something like that. And it allows it to be seen, for example, if people are farther away, if you're in a pit and people are on stage, or you're at the front of the stage and people are farther back, or they're off on the sides. Sometimes it just allows people to see things more clearly. But you can do it with your hands as well. And the idea is that either way, the way that you're communicating will hopefully become a silent instrument. That either this or your hands, this is a silent instrument that is having a great effect on the music that's happening.
I like that. I like what you say about the silent instrument. That's cool. And it goes back to what you were saying about how you play in the game also.
Yeah.
And so anyway, well, do you mind, would you be willing to take me back to 2001 when I was your student, and take my students back with me? Can you teach us a few basics for understanding or decrypting these hand signals of the conductor? Because when the conductor is waving their arms, back and forth, people who are not familiar with conducting can wonder, what is he doing? What are all, is it random? Or is there are there actual signals? Is there a code?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a code. And it really becomes a language, a way of communicating in gesture. And people that look at it from the outside sometimes have the sense like the conductor really doesn't do very much or isn't influencing that much. And maybe we occasionally have an inflated sense of ourselves of how much we do. But the point is, it actually does make a difference, and it can have a huge impact on a performance, depending on the level of the conductor or the group. So and I will tell you, when I teach conducting, a lot of some of my conducting students start the class and they wonder, what is involved and how hard is it? And almost to a person every year, within a month, they're like, "Gosh, conducting is far harder than I thought it was."
That's so true. That's true.
Yeah,
It's
than
really
just,
hard.
than just looking at someone who does it.
You chewed me out. I don't know how many times when you
Well,
were
I
a
mean,
teacher.
I don't know, chewed out, but yeah, the point is that.
You were hard on me. You were
Okay.
tough.
Well, we want to get people to stretch and grow. The point is, there's also a lot more involved than just the hands. I mean, the mental aspect is huge in terms of what you're processing about the score in your mind, what you're listening for in your ear, and psychologically how you're trying to guide people. But just to answer the professor's question here about the hand gestures, a couple basic things that we try to communicate. And I'll sum up what they are, and then I'll try to show you a couple of them. So I think we would try to communicate a tempo and rhythm with the gesture and the meter. I'll talk about that in a sec. We would try to show articulations, or is it legato or staccato, smooth or kind of accented. You would want to show a phrase. Where are we headed directionally and dynamically? Are we soft? Are we growing? Are we arriving at some larger moment? All these kind of things you can show, in addition to balance, and eventually what I would say, something a little bit harder to express in words. It becomes something a bit more mystical. I mean, if you're a Star Wars fan, you think about the Jedi, there's a little bit of that aspect in there of some kind of extra force that's involved in connecting, but just in the terms of the basic language. For example, the most basic pattern would be a 4 pattern. Here, let me just see if I can show this clearly. We would, you'd have a downbeat, which is generally the center, and it would come here. And in a 4 pattern, 2 generally goes to your left, 3 goes to the right, and 4 comes up. So a 4 pattern would look like this. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And I could show different dynamics. So if it's soft, I could be rather small. 1, 2, 3. Or if it was big, kind of aggressive music, 1, 2, 3, right? All these things kind of convey the character. And a 3 pattern, music that was in 3 would just drop out that beat. So you just have 1, and then you go to the right. 1, 2, 3. So do floor, door, ceiling. It's a joke. And there are other different patterns, but musicians are very familiar with those patterns, and they understand some of the basic aspects of meter. Are the beats organized in groups of 4 and 3 or in 7, whatever. But in a sense, that's only a very small part of your ultimate job as a conductor. So what we think of here, this is only a basic aspect, and then it's what you can layer into your conducting that can really show in that code the music, And sometimes, if you have a very good group, I know university singers, which Bethany was in a number of years ago, when we go on tour and the students are memorized on the music and they're singing it night after night, so they really have internalized it, you can do all kinds of kind of mystical things outside of a pattern that they respond to because they know the music and they sense what you're trying to communicate. And that to me becomes an even higher level of music making. It's like you're improvising a bit of code in the moment to create something beautiful with people.
That's gorgeous. And actually, I've encouraged my students to listen to some of the university singers' recordings. And
oh, great! We just had a video we put up of a Randall Thompson piece. It's a recording because we couldn't do our concert with coronavirus, so we sent out a recording. By the way, in these strange times, I hope that all of you are doing well. I know it's a very challenging and strange time, and normally I don't have beard. This is my corona beard here. But,
the corona beard.
In any case,
yeah. Yes, in fact, it came. I was curious. Are you teaching online now? With the university?
Yeah, we are, and as you can imagine, translating ensembles online is almost impossible.
Are you conducting online?
Not you can't really, because Zoom and other platforms don't allow for simultaneous music. There's too much delay in the system. So if I went like that, you would go bump about a half second later or something, and it would be different depending on what server you're on. So it's quite impossible at the moment. But there are other ways to create projects. They just can't happen with people making music together, which is in a way the whole point of ensemble.
Right, right, right.
So we've come up with some imaginative approaches, um, but it is not, it's not so easy to translate these things, which in a way shows their inherent value of being together in person. But we have, yeah, we are doing a lot of online teaching.
Cool. And so anyway, so you mentioned that you're the choir and orchestra conductor at the University of Virginia, with the youth singers who sound like professionals. I mean, even when I listen to them today, we didn't sound like that in 2001. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
They are professional level. I mean, they sound absolutely outstanding. And what's remarkable, I think, to point out is that these are university students. These are not professional level. They're, none of these students,
Right.
none of these people are being paid to make this beautiful sound. And so I'm just curious, what are the challenges of conducting a choir of university students? How do you get them to sound so good?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, Bethany, for the kind comments about the group. I should also clarify for the record, with all due respect to my colleague, so I'm actually not the director of the orchestras. I have a colleague who is I just guest conduct the orchestra, but I am the director of the choirs. So I think it's very interesting what you point out, because you're absolutely right. None of these people are professionals at the moment. Some of them will go on to be in music. And also, a lot of them aren't even majoring in music. They may be like your students here. They could be majoring in engineering, in English, in politics. And they share a love of music, they have talent, and they're smart. And so that enables us to do a lot musically. And I think the challenges are, to answer your question, I mean, you have to find and recruit these people out of the broader context of UVA, where they may be drawn to do many things, since they're not required to do this, and they get pulled in many directions, right? And you have to try to engage them and keep them on track in that sense, and then challenge them with the kind of musical projects that we're going to take on. And I think the advantage, one of the reasons we can sound quite good is, and this is true to a lot of colleges, I think, you have a lot of people in a very close age range. And if you have decent auditions, we usually audition over 100 people, a year, and wheedle that down to less than 50% making it, maybe even less than 40% with the women. And then you get some talented people in the room. You can create a certain, what I would call, uniformity of sound, because there's certain similarities about their voices, not by forcing it into a mold, just already they have certain similarities. It's fascinating if you do a group in a community where you could have people, I have people across 6 decades, right? People who are teenagers up to people probably in their 70s in my community group. We have a beautiful sound, but it's not the same, because you have a lot of more different sounds and people at different times in life. So I think one of the advantages college courses have is that limited age range. It creates a certain type of voice and resonance that can be exciting to make music with. So I mean, those are just a few thoughts, but it's fun, as you know. It's fun to work with college students. Very engaging, and they keep you on your toes, and you keep them on their toes, and they have the ability, even though it's not their profession, to make great music. Some people have said it's actually easier for a chorus of non-pros to be great than an orchestra. And there may be truth to that. I think Robert Shaw would agree with that, one of the great American choral conductors. So something to think about. But yeah, it's a pleasure to make
that
music.
actually comes to my, and actually links really well to another question I had, because you mentioned Robert Shaw, and I really wanted to introduce my students to Robert Shaw, but I have a different conductor who we're going to be focusing on. But
Oh, great.
so forgive me for that.
No, it's fine. Who are you going to focus on? I'm curious.
I have to go check on my. I got to go look on my on.
Oh,
my,
okay, yeah.
I'll tell you in a minute. I'll tell you in a minute. But
Yeah.
what's the difference between choir conducting and conducting an orchestra? And apologies if you can hear the zombie apocalypse behind me.
Oh, that's fine.
My children playing.
The kids, yeah.
Um,
Everybody understands that's part of the genre right now.
Oh, it's the usual. It's the usual occurrence. So
I think,
choirs and orchestras. What's the big difference?
yeah, I think in one way, there's no difference. Good conducting is good conducting. And I try to teach my students to have a technique that can be read well by singers or by instruments, right? But that said, it's kind of a yes and no question. You're right, there are some differences. And in a way, part of it is the different ways that choirs and orchestras rehearse. They do actually, in some ways, rehearse rather differently. And you have to understand a few different principles when you work with one or the other. I'll give just one as an example. When you sing in a chorus, you usually have a score and you have everybody's part in front of you. If you're a bass, you still have the soprano part, the alto part, the tenor part, and your own part. So you can see everybody what they're doing and relate to that. If you play an orchestra, and some of you may have played an orchestra, you'll understand this very readily. You say you're the violinist, you only have the first violin part, or the clarinet, you only have the clarinet part. So it's not, you don't see what everybody's doing. And a conductor has to understand that in the way they address the music and the ensemble, that difference between everybody having or not having music in front of them that shows things. That's just one example. Obviously, there are different technical things to talk about with instruments or the voice, but at the same time, some things are more universal. Breathing, phrasing, dynamics, balance, listening, trying to be aware of your neighbor when you're making music with them. So those things are more universal to any kind of ensemble. So it's interesting, Bethany. I enjoy doing both, and they are both challenging, and they are different in ways, but in many ways, certain things abide in all those situations.
Cool, that's great. Okay. Another question I had was something that I remembered from the conducting classes that you gave us way back when.
You have a good memory.
This
is
you.
a long time.
No. Here's where I'm going to be a suck up. Is you were a good teacher. How about that? So, good teachers are memorable. Trust me, I don't remember all of my classes at UVA. I'm not going to tell you which ones.
Yeah.
But I do remember most of the content, and I've actually kept my Die Wacket Auf research paper that I did for your class. So I kept it, and it's actually, believe it or not, in my office. Yeah, that's great.
So beautiful.
Yeah, I kept it, and it's in my office at Télécom Paris, my research paper, because I was going to show it to my students as an example.
Wonderful.
Of research project paper.
There's nothing better than Bach, right?
Right, but I can't get it now because it's stuck in my office. So.
Oh yeah, well.
That's all right.
Another time.
Another time. But I kept it, and I kept your notes. I still have your notes written, and your feedback. So, you're a good one. You're a good teacher. So anyway, the question I had, I remember you briefly mentioned during the semester that choral conducting, managing teams, running a company, because many of our students at Télécom Paris will go on to managing companies or running their own companies, doing startups in digital technology. Is there any link? What's the link? I know it's an obvious link.
Absolutely. No, in terms of the hats and all that. Yeah, that's fantastic. And all of you in this class, I wish you the best in whatever field you're going on in. And it does sound like a number of you are going to be involved in running a company or managing people. And I think you'll find the same thing that we as conductors find, which is this. You always have to wear a number of different hats as a conductor and as a leader. And so there's the basic hat, right? In my case, which is a musical one, you have to be a musician and you have to understand music and be able to talk in technical and other and inspiring terms to get people on the right track. But there are a lot of other hats, and they're not all related to music. I mean, you also, as a conductor, you have to be a psychologist, figure out how to motivate people, both as a group and as individuals, right? What motivates that person? What motivates that person? And they're not always the same answer. You have to be a bit of an administrator. There's a lot of logistical, non-musical details. To be honest, not my favorite, but it's something we all have to do in music. And you hopefully have some administrators as well, but you have to be organized and think about logistics in certain ways to make sure you've thought about all the possibilities you need to be thinking about. You have to be a visionary. You have to have some view of what you're going to do in the future. Where do you want, what are the larger goals? You have to, another thing, sometimes you have to be a fundraiser in our field. You know, you're with a group, there's a board. The board says, we'd like you to go meet with this donor to the arts. So then you put on the charm and the charisma and go meet with them. And I mean, and I don't mean in a fake way. I mean, because authentically you believe in what you're doing. And I have a feeling many of these things are directly translatable to the kind of fields you all will be working in. When you're leading an organization, you're going to find that it requires a number of different hats, and in your ability to kind of imagine what those are and cultivate your abilities in each of those kind of paths. I think it will help you be not just effective, but really quite brilliant leaders.
Cool, great, thanks. Okay, and let's see, also going back to 2001, I remember you distinctly saying that, from the conducting classes that we said that what the audience sees when they get to the performance and sit down in their chairs, that the conductor is actually no longer needed. Do you still believe this? You know, and can you kind of elaborate on what you meant or what you mean?
I would say, yeah, so I don't think I'd say no longer needed. That's a little strong, but I would say, I would put it this way. I would say 95% of the job is done. I would put it that way. When the conductor walks on stage, 95% of the job is already done. Because there's so much leading up to the performance. Rehearsal is kind of the fundamental part of the process. I have a feeling a sports coach would actually say similar things, that a ton of things have to happen before the game. And it's the same for music. But there is still that whatever percent when you go on stage, because at that moment you want to kind of hopefully be able to transport people to the highest level of artistry, not just reminding them what you've rehearsed, which is important, but also handling any wild cards that come up in a live performance, or adjustments to things like a different acoustic or a balance or audience response, you know, all those kind of things. And that's so that you're able to create what I would call, it's like that beautiful, the spirit of the moment, that you're able to create in that moment, something where we come together and create this artistic thing, the music or whatever it is, the performance, and then share it with people. And that sharing is also the other aspect. You know, sometimes, Bethany, you remember I talk to the audience, and it depends on the concert, but the idea there is that you can open a window to them. They can learn something about the music ahead of you doing a piece, and that's a way a conductor can also be effective in the moment of performance. But you are right that most of the work is done. I think not all of it, but most for sure. Yeah, I look forward to, hopefully we can get back to that soon.
Yeah, I hope so too. That would be nice. I mean, I'm sure it must be tough. Having to sit there and just sort of wait this out.
Yeah.
I do have one more question. It's kind of a big question. It's like also pitched directly to my students who are studying, who are going to be tomorrow's masters in technology. And they're very, very bright. They're very smart.
We will be relying on you for many great things.
We're definitely going to be relying on them on many, many, many things. But many of them are extremely talented musicians. And many of them actually in prepa, when they're preparatory classes, these are the tough 2-year exams in order to get into this engineering school. Many of them gave up music and in order to study for these exams, and therefore then be accepted into these very Ivy League engineering schools. I mean, Telecom
Uh-huh.
Paris is currently in 2020 been rated the third top engineering
Wow.
school of the country, and
Wow.
these kids are extremely bright. But they kind of have a nostalgic pull on from music. Those who are avid musicians haven't had a lot of time, and I'm just curious. I want to make the link. I want to make the link with technology and music. And have have you do you have your finger on the pulse, so to speak, of technology and music by any chance? If you don't worry. You don't have to answer this question.
Yeah.
But has technology changed or contributed to the classical music world in any way, or specifically for conducting, but even for performing or music? Um, my students are measuring in artificial intelligence, big data, cybersecurity. Have you seen any trends in the classical music world in 2020 that involve any of these majors that I have mentioned? Can my students maybe hope to combine their love of music and their talent with the tech world?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, no question. I think let me back up and take it these are really good questions, Bethany, and let me take this one in a couple stages. The first stage is, as some of you know, there obviously are differences that from being a musician to being a big data person or an AI person. And if someone listening to this class today, still has some deep passion for music and feels they should pursue that as a vocation in some way, I hope that you'll find a way to do that, because we need musicians just as we need big data people. Um, but if you don't feel that's your main calling professionally, but you still want to stay involved, I would say this is absolutely important. In fact, I'm going to point to the picture right behind me. I don't know if you can see this right here. That's a picture of Leonard Bernstein, great American musician, sitting at his piano. It's probably why I have it near my piano. Someone I study and write about. He was a great conductor and composer, and he believed that music, specifically you could say classical music, which is a tricky term. We'd have to unpack that in a longer discussion. But music is for everyone. And he passionately believed that. I believe that too. It doesn't matter what your field is. Music is for everyone. And so I would deeply encourage people and enthusiastically encourage them to pursue it in whatever way they see fit. And if that means having a job in the day and then you have a way of making music as an avocation or on the weekends or whatever, great. If it means more what you're implying, like where is the intersection of your field and music, that's a whole nother interesting question. And that could be a place where some of you could lead us into new territory. I think that here's the thing about what I do. I have two thoughts about your question, Bethany, about technology, right? So on the one hand, it's strange. I would say our field almost stubbornly resists. That's a strange way to put it. It's like I'm personifying the field, but it's a field that some of the fundamentals have not changed radically over a long period of time, and in a way, it while it benefits from technology, and I'll talk about that in a minute, some of the things we do, you could have done 50 years ago or 100 years ago in somewhat similar ways. And in a way, that's the beauty of it. There's a historic continuity, and there's something very direct and human about it without technological interface, right? Just humans. So that's one way to think of it. On the other hand, there have definitely been a lot of benefits and advances in technology that do impact us in music or that are part of music. And I'll just give a couple examples. Think about it. First of all, think about the availability of music, and not just recording, but for example, YouTube. You could go on YouTube and probably find almost any piece that you would want to get a quick listen to. And so there's an availability that wouldn't have been there before. The technological capability of actual recorded sound is so much better than 100 years ago or even 50 years ago. And although some of you that are LP analog fans may have a whole argument about that, but there's a lot of advantages, and there's advantages. Even people have got, if you listen to an orchestra from 100 years ago, forget about the recording, and an orchestra now, the level of playing has actually also gone up. So there have been some fascinating, kind of changes and improvements. And then you could get into the whole aspect of computer music, of sampling, of studies of music cognition and perception. What is the brain doing when it hears music? I mean, all these things benefit from technology, and there's work to do. I was looking up the other day, when Bethany mentioned some of you were in big data, I was just running to read up on that a little, and I found it fascinating that in the term big data, they talked about three terms: volume, variety, and velocity. And I found that interesting because those terms are actually very pertinent to music as well, especially volume and velocity. And certainly variety. So I think it's interesting that there are connections that may be more oblique or take a little more work to see. But look, I would say, while I hopefully don't see robots replacing conductors in the near future, it's amazing what, never say never, but it's amazing what technology has done in our world. And at the same time, I think the arts and music help us remember the human aspect. That's very important in a technological world, that we remember the basics of human interaction through art that takes us to some place we can't go otherwise. That is very special and worth preserving and thinking about. And I think you'll find ways, if you're passionate about it and dedicated to it and work hard on these things, you will find ways to combine these loves of music and your involvement in technology or cybersecurity or AI, big data, etc. I think it's entirely possible.
Thanks. That's awesome. Thanks, Michael. That was my last big question. Thanks very much. It was really, really cool to have you here. I know you have a final message for my students.
Sure. Well, first of all, Bethany, thank you so much for the invitation. It's so great to see you, and I'm happy to be with you in this way. Students, I wanted to just resurrect a little bit of my French from many years ago, so I'll just try to say something to you in French that would only seem appropriate since you're in Paris, and here you've been very kind to listen to my English for the last however many minutes. So I did want to say, I'll do my best here. Merci de m'avoir invité dans votre classe. Bethany était étudiante ici, et je suis heureuse d'être avec vous. Bonne chance dans vos études. Prenez du temps pour la musique. Et bonne santé. So, à bientôt, j'espère.
Bravo. C'était très bien.
Oui.
Oui. Absolument. Je te remercie beaucoup. Merci beaucoup, Michael.
De rien.
Oui, et j'espère à bientôt, soit face à face, soit en ligne. Et merci encore. Tu es un prof absolument formidable. Et les élèves, ils ont énormément de chance d'avoir toi comme professeur à University of Virginia. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.